majority of students, probably at the high 85% level, they are following rules. They are doing what is asked of them. But we do have a small minority of students who are not. We have instituted as well some other alternative programs so that they are not in environments disrupting the classes. But I also, as we continue to kind of navigate the space, want to be careful not to, overcorrect while we are instituting some procedures right now to deal with this moment, which also, is a reflection of a lot of what's happening in the community, also spilling into the schools. We want to do so knowing that we will put some temporary measures in place. We will assess how it's doing, but we won't make any long-term decisions about safety provisions without coming to the community, dialoguing with you, because we know that the schools are I don't want to say just the property. The schools belong to the community, and so we want to make sure that any long-term decisions are made with input. So we will continue to do short-term things that we feel like we need to do to maintain a safe environment, one conducive to teaching and learning. But then again, we will continue to dialogue with you. Okay? So again, in a nutshell, it's a mixed experience. A lot on the positive side, but and not unexpected for the diversity of students that we serve. Some challenges, and so I think you can tell though by the number of staff members that are here tonight, and by even your presence of being engaged, that we have what it takes to make it through to this moment, so that we're just solely focused on producing that graduate that we all want and that we know our children deserve. So, yes.
Okay. Todd Fitzwater, Firestone Falcons All Sports Boosters President. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming back home. Appreciate the leadership being here this evening. I always appreciate the Board of Education and Akron Public Schools always willing to engage us. I know I talked to Mr. Rambler at length a couple weeks ago. So I appreciate the leadership being here. I appreciate Mr. Johnson being back in the seat, Ms. Sachs. My question is this, and this is the one that really gets me, is I understand that we can't overcorrect, and I want to be a part of the solution. I think all of us here want to be a part of the solution if there is an issue and concerns at Firestone. Restorative discipline is my big concern here, and that is if someone is found to do something destructive to the school or found to be in a destructive pattern or whatnot, are those individuals that have been identified, are they put back into the classroom with my child, or are they, you said you have some alternative things that are going on, and again, I know we don't want to overcorrect, I understand that, but at the same time, I don't want my child to be in a room where someone thought it was appropriate to rip out a toilet or something like that. Can you assure me that that's not going to happen?
Well, what I can assure you is, I can assure you that we will consider each situation, and that we will hold students accountable accordingly. And we will consider ultimately, when making a decision even about their future, we will consider that from the lens of that child and other children. So with that, I think that's the best I can give you, because I can't give you a blanket to say no in any instance. A child who vandalized a wall, who drew on the wall, can't return to the classroom. But
I would agree with that.
Depending on the severity, depending on the nature of the situation, we have the responsibility to act on behalf of all children. And I think one of the things we know from, while I did joke and say, I am one, they are not, they weren't frozen in that moment. They did learn from that, they did adjust, they are highly productive individuals today. So we understand though, I am a mom, so I care very much that my child is safe.
There was no control. Everyone's going nuts. She's the only one studying. How does that work? Well, at a minimum, how do we control that?
Right, and so, thank you, and thank you for talking to me on the weekend too. I appreciate that. And I do know you've reached out to Mr. Johnson, and he is working with you on that very situation. I will not condone disruptions like that. And so there's, we wish to set the right environment, and I'm hopeful that in those instances, the educators in that setting, I believe in that particular instance, there was a substitute.
Correct.
I read that. And so that substitute likely needed support to creating that environment for that test to take place. In a perfect world, we would have hoped that the students would have complied, that the setting would have been just conducive to that standardized test, but that wasn't the case. I think rightly so, you've alerted, the staff members were responding, we're looking into it to make sure that your child or any other child is not harmed in their ability to take that test, demonstrate what they know so that those tests for whatever they count for are valid and reliable, so we're looking into that. We unfortunately can't control right off the gate. We don't know always what each and every student is going to do. But what I can tell you is what we're talking about doing as we're turning into next quarter, and what I'm already doing with the staff, working with all of our principals in all of our schools, is reviewing again the expectation, walking into the buildings, asking them what supports do you need. We're devoting more supports to the schools so that they have what they need to set expectations, to hold students accountable. We're meeting with students. That was another thing. We're also meeting with our student leaders to make sure we're getting ideas from the voice of the student and enlisting them in helping to influence many students, influence other students. So both are elected leaders, if you will, in the schools, but also we're working with those students that just have influence. I, as a prior principal, know that you can also work with student groups to say, help us out. We really need to have a conducive learning environment where students can speak up and say, be quiet, sit down. We're here to learn, those sorts of things. So there's a multitude of what we're doing. Unfortunately, in an environment where you have so many different students coming with a variety of experiences, needs, values, things of that nature, I wouldn't be truthful if I told you we can guarantee it. What I can tell you is we expect it, we will reinforce it, and we will make adjustments wherever needed.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming back. That, I think, would be definitely the first step to this goal. But to clarify, it was not just the substitute teacher's classroom. This was school-wide, and as far as the ACT practice, which is basically data collection. So if you don't create the environment to properly collect data, the data that we collect is not, it's tampered with, right? So I just wanted to finish that question with the reality, not just my daughter's classroom.
No,
And thank you for taking my question. Thank you for showing up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things I do want to say, we've been doing a lot of monitoring, a lot of being physically present right now in our central office staff. Our central office is deployed out in the land for a great portion of their day. And so in this environment where, because of the many absences due to COVID and things of that nature, we are having to have more than usual amounts of substitutes. And so we are asking central office leaders to spend more of their time in the buildings, helping out as those persons who are familiar with our schools, familiar with staff, things of that nature, that they can really be a source of support. So we're getting information really regularly. I'm visiting schools personally as well, really talking to educators hearing firsthand what the needs are and trying to respond very quickly accordingly. I say that to say that there are times at which I will hear the retellings of this happened at X school today and this is what it was like, when we have persons that are right there on the ground. And so I want to say that if you have questions, please call us. We can verify. We've tried to be very responsive and timely in communicating to you. Here's what we know. Here's what happened today. Here's what was done about it. So you have been receiving with any of the safety incidents, follow-up messaging coming from our principals, and even on instances coming from me, that we can verify that. What is challenging is when we take what we're hearing on Facebook or in other forums, kind of word of mouth is to say, this is what's happening and it's happening everywhere. Sometimes those instances aren't all the way accurate. And so, again, one of the other commitments I want to make to you all is we will be communicating. We will continue to communicate. We're going to be transparent in our communications to keep the community informed of, both the positive things, which again are many, but also when we're challenged, because we want to know that when we are challenged, we can work through that with your support and with your active engagement. So we will continue to do that as well. Mrs. Tyler, are you raising your hand? Yeah, I thought I said raising your hand. Yes, ma'am.
I know that in the interest of time, and you probably have a lot more on your agenda, so I'm going to speak broadly here. First of all, I want to publicly and personally thank you and your entire staff for all the steps you have taken specifically related to the Firestone incident that happened a couple weeks ago. To ask broadly two questions. Are we going to have a town hall meeting? That was something that was tapped into, an idea that was thought about. Just wanted to know if we're going to have a town hall meeting to kind of wrap up that whole situation. And then number two, maybe the officer can speak to this. Have the individuals been apprehended, just to give us some sense of security? I don't know how far you want to go with that today, but if you could just tap into that just a little bit.
Yes, all three individuals have been identified. One has been apprehended. Our gun violence reduction team is still looking for the other two. That's as of a few days ago when I was in contact with Officer Rick Mannis, who is the school resource officer and was able to identify those individuals.
I'm sorry. The second one's been apprehended now as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Right, and to speak to the town hall, because when that request came in, we were so close to this gathering. We tried to communicate very broadly that we would also be addressing safety with the councilman for this gathering versus having yet another town hall. But we will keep our ear to the ground and figure out, kind of when else we need to be present, and when we need to be present, we will. And again, if there are also any questions that the team can answer that I can't, team or Mr. Johnson, I don't know if there's anything you want to say as well, we can feel free to do that. But two of the three are, as he said, apprehended. We've been keeping close tabs on that. And again, those students, and I think we said this in our communication, were not associated with the school. Yes, ma'am.
Were the guns real? Were they real
We
guns?
can't verify that to be accurate either direction.
And was it gang related?
Same thing, we wouldn't be able to verify that it is or isn't.
So eventually will we know if the guns were actual weapons or no?
I would assume the officer would say the same thing. From the photos, it's really hard to make that determination. I suppose if APD arrested the individuals with the same weapon, then they could verify that. But with the photos only as the only piece of evidence, it's going to be hard to make that determination.
And especially, unfortunately, when they make so many things anymore that look so close to the real thing, which is you know, a whole nother, it just shouldn't be. We shouldn't make toys that look as close to that, but it's hard to determine.
Yeah, but, you know, in the communications, it was like, put in quotation mark, guns, like they weren't real, like that was already, so it's terrifying to
Yeah.
have kids sitting in study hall and 6 police officers come in and have
Correct.
your child send you that picture when you're at home. It was traumatic to a lot of the kids. Some of them were crying.
Yeah. Yeah, and we tried to respond with sports. I agree. I was traumatized as well, seeing that, you know, just on behalf of the students and the staff there. And so that was unsettling. It was taken very serious. I
have two adult children that went to Firestone, and I now have a sophomore, and it's just the amount of violence that he doesn't even tell me much, but that I've heard about, and then it's just not like it was when my adult children were there, and it's terrifying as a parent to have to think, am I doing the right thing? Because we love Firestone, we love the arts, we love everything about it. My husband and I grew up in West Akron, but you have your kid coming home and saying that they lock all the doors and kids are beating each other up in the hallways. It's terrifying, and I feel like it's being brushed over, that you're not acknowledging that, you know, that this is going on.
No, I am acknowledging that this is going on, and I'm acknowledging what we're doing about it. So I hear you, I feel what you're saying, I agree. I'm concerned, and we are responding. I will say, in no way is this an excuse. We are not alone, unfortunately. We are living in a really challenging, unsafe world at the moment. Just this afternoon, I talked to my colleague from a suburb in Seattle, Washington, who isn't in a diverse setting whatsoever, in that environment, who said, you know, Christine, I understand what you're going through. They were yesterday, had a loaded gun in a middle school in that environment, and she said, you know what, it's our 8th this year. So that was that community. But the challenge is, it's just, you know, part of what I was asking my peers sitting there is, what world are we living in when young people are so plentifully getting access to things that they shouldn't? But by the same token, I do believe we have the ability in our schools, through the vigilance of all involved, to keep our students safe. And this by far is not the norm. It was an unfortunate safety incident, and we've responded really, really seriously, and we will continue to do so.
I also just wanted to say something. I appreciate everyone being here, and I appreciate how seriously this is being taken. I also appreciate APD has been very forthright about this and has been very transparent with me as they've gone through this process. It's scary. I mean, I graduated from Firestone in 2009, and I was just thinking when I was here, there was an incident one day. There was a kid that I took algebra with, and he had a lot of issues. And one day after school, he got into an altercation with his dad in the parking lot. He actually stabbed his dad and was arrested. And it's a terrible situation. It was really traumatic because, you know, there are a lot of people who are friends with him, and all things being equal, like, he was a good kid, and you know, it was a terrible thing that happened. But and that's not to minimize these challenges or to say that these challenges, you know, like this always happens and things like that. But it's just to recognize that, you know, this is something that has to be addressed, but that, you know, is a continuing issue. And I appreciate everyone who's trying to address it. I don't know, Officer Brown, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Not as far as the schools, but with the guns, we just can't speculate with the picture. I've seen BB guns, airsoft guns, always know, you know, the dogs that I've heard. So, you know, to assume anything, that's why it's politically based as far as guns, because you just can't assume.
Yeah, I just said, first of all, I believe that there's strength in diversity. That's one of the reasons why we love Akron Public Schools and love the community in which we live in. I come from the Army where there's a lot of diversity, and I was always appreciative of that. With the communication, I appreciate that too, you stating that you're going to communicate and all that. But also understanding within diversity, there are challenges that come socioeconomically and families and all that. I know that you're going to send out communications to the family and then through, the all calls and all that. But I also know from being intimately involved at Firestone that sometimes that falls on deaf ears. We believe we're getting to the influencers. We believe that we're getting to the parents and those that look over our children, our students. But we need to engage the students. So my question is, and I'm very, very appreciative of Mr. Johnson being back in his position, because that was something that I think it is what it is, what was before, but I think that was the right move from a leader. He's not a manager, he's a leader. And having Mr. Johnson back in the school is very critical to the success of Firestone right now, especially during this time. My question would be, and this is either to you, ma'am, or to Mr. Johnson, is that are we going to talk as we ramp up after the first quarter and now we set new expectations? Are we going to bring the kids together, the students together, to be able to have this conversation as a school versus just sending out communications to the parents? Is that something that's planned?
Yeah, so
I assumed it was, but just.
I have, the first thing that I did when I came back was I met with the staff. I made an all call to the parents.
Yep.
Hopefully you all listened to it.
We did, and it was definitely a different tone that we had been at the beginning of the year, so it was uplifting, it was right on the spot at the right time.
Good. And then the second thing I did was I met with our student leaders, all of them, our captains of the football team, our student council, and I also have a leadership cabinet that I meet with once a month. There's 2 freshmen, 2 sophomores, and I need 2 more freshmen and 2 sophomores. But I have 2 juniors and 2 seniors that have been with me since they were freshmen. And the first thing that I asked them was, what are we missing? What do we need the teachers to know? Right? As a learner making this transition, if you could tell them anything about improving this space for you, what would it be? And secondly, what can we do right now with your peers to fix, to improve, to get this thing back together? Because my children went to Firestone when that happened.
Yep.
My daughter was a friend of the individual that struggled. I can remember when my daughter was a freshman, there was an incident that terrified me and my wife was running up to the school, and I was like, no. Just wait a second, let's just settle down. These incidents happen. The thing that makes Firestone so special, and I've said dope, is that we put the pieces of our community back together. And this is no exception. We will do this, we'll get back to where we were together. And I think the biggest piece is hearing from our students and then executing on their ideas. So they have an idea. We will be meeting, I'm meeting with them on Friday to begin to put a plan together. And then my leadership cabinet will start to talk about what resources we need. Mr. Black, what resources we need to be able to execute this idea. And then parents and community members, you'll see the messages and you'll hear the messages coming from the students. I agree with you. I think their voice is the most powerful if we're going to be able to put our community back together one day, one time, one random act at a time. But it's going to be slow. And I, like everybody else, I appreciate your support. It means so much to me that you send your children to me, but my goal is to send them home the same way they came. So my door is open, and if you talk to your children, they will tell you, I get yelled at by kids all the time about things that they want, things that they need, or things that they see. And we are going to fix that issue with the test. I can promise you, it was a mistake on our part. I haven't had a chance to talk to your daughter, but I will. But I've already talked around that issue many times today since I was made.
I appreciate that. All I'm asking is for things to be right, not even anything extra, just to make it right.
Yes.
Along those lines, if you don't mind my asking you another question, this gentleman. Will that strategy, your game plan there, literally, have specific consequences? Because I think all too often we keep hearing this rhetoric, which is great because I can do it too. And, you know, we're going to talk to the students, we're setting up these council. I've come across lately, and I'm also a teacher, by the way, taught a lot of equity in the state of New Mexico. Whereas we're going to set up this task force, and we've got all these groups and all this energy, but what are the specific consequences? And will those be available for the parents, speaking of metrics, to see if this is actually being enacted? Because within that, I feel like our kids are the guinea pigs of this long strategic plan. And that's scary. So, and I think, you know, as we raise our own kids, or how I would manage a classroom, when a kid walks in, they know what my rules and expectations are. And I think that message is lacking. Not that it's not there, it's that obviously there's a disconnect, because we've got to act on it.
Yeah, I would encourage you to talk to make sure, because I've had some pretty fantastic messages in the morning, just reminding students of what the expectations are, and what the potential consequences will be. There are consequences for actions, but they're balanced, right? And I'm as transparent to a fault. And there are certain things that my supervisor is gonna say, Larry, you can't do that. And there are certain things that my supervisor is gonna say, Larry, you better do that. And one of those things, you better hold these kids accountable if this happens. So I think the expectation, at least from my people to your people, is that there's an expectation that we have that learning is paramount when we walk in the doors at Firestone, period. The other things is about what it feels like to the students, and how do we give students the ownership of that building. So I think it's both and for us. It's, yes, I want students to be in front of what it feels like and to have a say in that building, because it's theirs, right? I just work for them. But ultimately, and also, we want to be able to say, this is the expectation. This is what we want everybody that walks in the building. This is what learning feels like. This is what it looks like at Firestone.
So because of the monitoring of these spots in the hallways, smoking pot, doing drugs, fighting, consequence. So we'll be able to catch that and eliminate that from the building, I suppose.
Well, I
Absolutely.
feel like what
But keep in
happened.
mind, like, so, you know, some kids may come to school with that heavily on their person, differently from they are in the halls smoking pot. But nonetheless, if they're under the influence, we have expectations, we have rules for that. And we will apply those rules.
I've just observed over the years, I have a senior, that kids that get expelled from Firestone end up at East, or a kid from Garfield that gets expelled there ends up at Firestone. And so I feel like that, I think your statistic was 15% that are getting in trouble. It just, the names and the faces change, but and I get, you need, you know, second chances and third chances, but they're wreaking havoc on some of the classrooms and environment, so.
When you think about resources to invest in Firestone as far as personnel goes, is there any thought on getting like a building sub to stay there? Because then that substitute would know the building, get to know the students, and know the staff. So one of the issues I feel at Firestone has been the shortage of subs, which has been a problem in APS in all districts for years and years now. But the teachers are getting doubled up on, which, you know, discipline is 90% prevention, and you need that supervision. And when you're overloaded and you're giving up your lunch and you're giving up your planning period, you then are not as prepared in your classroom. But if there was a building sub assigned or a couple assigned, they would get to know the building, the kids, and the staff.
Yes, ma'am. And actually, that's a great idea. You're right, and we do have that in place. So we actually do have subs devoted to buildings, that are there and can be used. We have that throughout the district. What we're facing this year is unprecedented, it's unique, it is in every single school district. Is a challenges in the amount of available persons to sub because we're experiencing inconsistent attendance because the illness related to COVID is still active. So even when educators themselves are feeling okay, they might have a child who needs to be quarantined because of their exposure or some other relative, things of that nature. So we're really trying to manage a volatile attendance pattern this year, A. B, because of COVID and our safety protocols, we tried to keep class sections smaller than usual so that folks could spread out. So as well, the proximity of people didn't contribute to people being ill. So if you spread sections out in that regard, then you need more people to cover them. So we're just in a challenging moment with substitutes. If you turn on the news, you're seeing stories about this in all of the surrounding districts. You're even seeing some places where they've had to cancel school for a minute, go back virtual because they just don't have the personnel to manage. So we've done a lot in terms of substitutes. Again, we're using a lot of our other staff to support that. We upped significantly the rate of pay to sub on a daily basis for a period of time. We also increased the incentives and supports to teachers who could be able to cover each other's classrooms. So we're being as creative as we can be and doing so in a community and talking with even other school districts to say, if you figured out something, what have you tried? We do have another hiring fair coming up, so November 2nd, just a plug for this. We do need substitutes. We need quite a few roles, and so we'd love to welcome you into the APS family. If you are interested, or if you have other persons who are willing and are interested. There was a bill signed in Columbus that allowed for, like it did last year during the heart of the pandemic, some flexibility in who could sub. You still need to have, a degree and things of that nature, but there are persons who are actually PhDs in the science areas that don't have a teaching license. They are still able to sub in some courses and or tutor. And so there is a bill that will allow that flexibility. As soon as that gets signed by our governor, we can actually infuse some other professionals to help out. We'll also stay around, so if you want to.
Yeah, one last question, and that is, I know I talked to Mr. Rambler, and again, I appreciate the conversation. It was about a 30-minute conversation, so I appreciate his time he allocated. We talked about student ID cards. I know that anyone in APS staff has to, at all times, wear their credentials and all that. Is that something that, I know it was on the table, is that something that's back on the table?
Well, we're exploring that concept. In student ID cards coming from several districts who used ID cards at one point and another. There's a positive side to that, then there's a downside to that. Because you also have instances where then that becomes the focus and the enforcement and the this and the that. So we are looking at, both what from the positive side of could this be a contributor in a positive way, and then also looking at what might be the challenges, because we don't want to add anything that further makes it a more challenging situation. But the team and I are happy to stay around to answer any questions or just to even meet you face to face. So thank you again for coming out and for your engagement. Stay with us, please. We're going to work our way towards the state that you want and desire.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the forthrightness and coming here and addressing everything. and I know, and also from the whole team, but also, I have so much appreciation for you, Principal Johnson. So, definitely, we want to be, as transparent as possible. We want both in the city government and Akron Public Schools to make sure people feel heard when there are concerns. I also just wanted to say briefly, I appreciate the focus on IB. I was an IB student. I think it's so valuable that the IB concepts are being applied for all students at the elementary school level and the middle school level. Just today I was on a Zoom call with this guy who grew up in Chicago, and he was talking for a while, and he just happened to mention IB. And I was like, I knew there was something about you, but it's so valuable, and there are so many aspects of Firestone and across Akron Public Schools that are really valuable. There's so many things that are strengths, and there are the challenges as well. I'm going to be very brief since we're a little over, so I don't want to take up too much time. Briefly, did just want to recognize Dr. N.J. Akbar, who came in, our president of our Akron School Board, with a nice green tie there in the back. But just two brief things from city government. One of the big things we've been talking about, you might have seen in the newspaper, is American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds, right? So the city is getting $145 million from the federal government. We got half of it this year. We're getting the next half next year. Over the last 6 months, the mayor has spent time with his team putting together a rigorous set of projects that he'd like to fund that includes money for housing rehab, that includes $20 million for gun violence prevention, that includes a host of other things. In the last few weeks, this has come to City Council. City Council was asked to approve the expenditure of all $145 million, right? Not just the 18 projects that have been brought up for this year, but it's going to be 3 or 4 years before we're going to spend all this money. And even the 18 projects, and again, I'm going to try not to be too negative here, but what we've received so far is pretty basic information, just a sentence or two, not the amounts that are actually going to be spent, not the organizations that are going to help carry this out. Council hasn't had the chance to ask questions, and actually, ironically, we are in the coming weeks, but we were asked to vote on it before that. And so on Monday, I voted no. I didn't feel like I could, without a meaningful chance to provide input, I could sign off on that, right? That's not saying that the ideas, that there aren't a lot of great ideas. That isn't saying that this money isn't a blessing and that I don't want us to receive that money. That's just to say that I wish that there was a better process. With that being said, this process is going to unfold over a number of years. There are still opportunities for there to be input. Next month, we're going to have a number of folks from the city come in and talk about the entire process, talk about what some of the priorities are thus far, and have a chance for folks to share your ideas, right, for what the money should be spent on. But it's not every day that you vote against $145 million, so I wanted to make sure that I explained it. We also had a longer explanation in our monthly newsletter. If you didn't sign in, make sure you sign in so that you can be on our monthly newsletter. The other thing is gun violence. Obviously, we touched upon the impact in the schools, but the city of Akron is dealing with really significant levels of gun violence, right? And it's very tragic. We see in the paper these instances. Every morning we get an email from our Lieutenant Miller in our police department with the daily report, and it's a sobering part of my day every day, reading it and hoping that there isn't going to be a homicide in there. The city council is spending a lot of time talking about different approaches to help improve the way we create public safety, whether that's alternative responses to some 911 calls so we can free up officer time to focus on gun violence, whether that's increased use of cameras. There's been discussion about that specifically around the University of Akron, but I think that's going to be a pilot program. But there's a lot of different considerations. The Akron Police Department is working very hard at this, and Chief Steve Milet, our new chief, he was going to come in November, but I think we're going to have that ARPA discussion in November, so I think he's going to come and celebrate the holidays with us probably in December now. But he's been very community-minded. He's been out at every community meeting, and I'm sure he would love to meet everyone here. So that's the main things that are going on. I do just want to thank everyone for coming out. I know it's a little bit of a heavy conversation, but I think that The one thing that I have learned in 2 years almost on council is that we have a city of 190,000 people. It's a better community when everyone is part of it, when everyone's voices are heard, when we have conversations like this. It might be uncomfortable, right? There have been more uncomfortable ones, but you know, it's really how we are going to overcome the challenges that we have is by everyone being engaged in whatever way they can. So thank you all. Thank you to everyone from APS, and we'll see you here next month.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, how are you? Take care, take care. Carol. Oh, very good. Great. I thought Tammy was supposed to say. Always engaged.